If you're a nonfiction author, especially a coach, consultant, speaker, or thought leader, this episode will probably sound familiar if you've started writing your book already. Because at some point in the author journey and in your writing or publishing process, most authors have thought this same thought. Why is this taking so much longer than I expected? Today, I want to be really clear right from the start. This usually isn't because you're doing anything wrong. In my experience, most books always take longer than you expect or take for a variety of reasons. And in most cases, what's happening is much more simple. Authors tend to underestimate how many steps and how much real world time exists between I'm writing a book and my book is being published. In this episode, I want to walk you through where that underestimation happens most often based on what I see with working with authors every single week. And later in this episode, I'll share a real example using print on demand that caused us to pause on a client's timeline, not because of mistakes, but because of how the different print on demand platforms were handling the same files. This is Your Path to Publish. I'm your host, Zach Christensen. For the past decade, our team has guided authors just like you to find the best path to publish your book, get people excited to buy it even before it launches, and to turn it into the ultimate business card to build your business and your legacy. If you are ready to get your book out of your head and into people's hands, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. So to kick things off, let's start at the beginning with your author journey in the book development phase, where you're doing all of the writing yourself. Most authors don't really underestimate how hard it is to write a book. What they do underestimate is how long it takes in real life. Writing, as we probably all know and have experienced, is rarely linear. You don't necessarily just sit down, write chapter after chapter, and smoothly move toward the end. Life happens, work gets busy, your energy fluctuates, and clarity, creativity, and inspiration comes in waves and at different times for authors. So this is why in the writing process, I advise authors as much as possible to get that first draft out quickly. Not because it needs to be perfect, but because everything else really depends on it. So until that first draft exists, the rest of the publishing timeline can't really start. And when you get that first draft done, this is where that optimism tends to sneak in. Because you think, okay, I'm nearly there, and I'm going to get this done in the next 2 or 3 months, which could happen. And most of the delays that happen don't come from procrastination. They come because you're looking in the future and you think, I'll finish this chapter next week. And then next week turns into next month. Now, again, this is normal, but it's important to be honest about it. Things take longer than you think. And once your draft is finished and out there, many authors feel like they're almost done. And this is where the next big underestimation shows up in editing. Editing is not one step, it's a process. It usually includes the developmental edits, the author revisions that you go through, the line or copy edits and proofreading, and going through and seeing what feedback you get from those that you hire or have look at this. And that includes beta reader feedback as well. And then you're going through making changes, and you may find you spend more time on a chapter than it took to actually get that chapter finished. And then at the end of that process, you're going through the final approvals. Each one of those takes time, not just because of the work itself, but because of the decision making. And you want to be very thoughtful about this. Editing requires distance from the manuscript at times. It requires emotional energy, something that you've put in, a story you've shared that you think was perfect may not fit anymore when you're on the third or fourth draft or get some feedback. So it really requires the clarity that you're searching for so that you know what you're focusing on, what you're talking about is going to work. And authors often plan for weeks to get this done when in the reality it may take months. not because the editor you're working with is slow, not because the author isn't capable, but because editing is iterative by nature. You're responding, you're revising, you're rereading, and that rhythm is almost never factored into the original timeline. So when you get the editing done, you now are entering the book publishing phase, and you might have this feeling of everything's done. But in reality, this is where the logistics really come in. The files that you have go from a Word doc or a Google Doc into a format that can be uploaded to the printers or the print-on-demand services that you're using. The files need to be finalized. Interior layouts need to be prepared correctly. Covers need to match the platform specifications. And then comes one of the parts that can delay things the most. I start to see this with many of the authors. They're getting the manuscript finished. It's off to the designer. And now they're asking, when can this be done? The designer might have given a timeline for a month, but then you're entering the printing world. Even if you're using print on demand. Print on demand does not mean instant printing. Even when you're using print on demand platforms, there is still real production time involved. Files have to be uploaded. Platforms have to review them. Electronic proofs need to be generated and sent to you. Those proofs have to be approved, and then those proofs are printed, shipped, and reviewed with a physical copy. I highly recommend that you not skip the step of shipping yourself proof copies or copies that are printed that you can physically look through. It just feels different, and you'll notice mistakes or things that you have not noticed previously. And so here's a real world example that I experienced recently. So for a client, we recently ordered print proofs for them using Kindle Direct Publishing and Ingram Spark. So 2 different vendors, and we'll probably throw in the third of Book Vault. The interior design looked great, and the covers looked great, but there was a subtle difference in the background. One of the versions had some lines going through it in the background, and it was shifted up a little bit higher than we expected compared to the other proof. And it looked like it was on a background with college-ruled sheet paper. Now, honestly, we were so far into the process that we forgot, did the designer put that in there, or was this a mistake of the printer? So to solve this, we had to go back to the designer and learn that, yes, there was some texture, subtle texture added to the background, but how those were translating over to one of the printers is what it was not showing up. So we had a decision to make. Remove it completely because it actually looked great without it, or work with the designer to solve the issue with the printing partner to understand what we needed to fix. Now, I'll tell you, some printing partners and print on demand, especially, are easier to work with than others. They have direct access to the issue that's going on, and others really don't. And you might only be communicating via email or opening a ticket to work with them. So keep that in mind. Now, related to the printing, if your proofs are great, you're now, all right, let's get this distributed out to the retailers. And that takes time too. And it doesn't all populate at the same time and the same day. It can take a few days. You'll see your book show up on Amazon, for example, but it's missing a cover and the categories aren't there and the pricing isn't there. The next day, the cover is added, and the final day, the pricing is added. But until a book is ordered, the categories that you've put your book in don't show up. Other times you may order books and expect them to be arriving by a certain day. But because of the time of the year, it may take a little bit longer for your book to get in the queue to be printed, even if they have estimated it will only take a few days to get to be printed and then to be shipped out to you. You can't rely on turnaround times. So you always need to factor in additional time as you're putting all of this together. As part of the best practice, which I already hit on, we typically run print proofs across multiple platforms. For example, Amazon, Kindle Direct Publishing, Book Vault, and Ingram Spark are the ones that we typically use, but those aren't the only options out there. Whatever it is, you just need to make sure you factor in the timelines that it takes to get the books, look through them, approve it, and I recommend at least 2 months for this process. You might be able to do it in less time, maybe 45 days, but factor in the 2 months just in case. Because if this is taking all your attention, it's taking away from your ability to market and promote your book which you do not want to shortchange yourself on. So to kind of wrap this up, I want to be very clear. Delays are not a failure. They're not a sign you're behind. They're not a sign you did something wrong. They're publishing timelines, and they don't fall apart because authors are careless. They fall apart because too many small timelines were never accounted for. A few days here and there, the time it takes to get back, vacation time, it just takes longer than you might expect. Writing takes longer than you expect. I've experienced this recently with my book. Editing is iterative. Production has real-world constraints. Platforms have queues. Proofs require decisions. And when you plan to have some additional time in there, these things will not feel as stressful. It doesn't mean you won't run into problems, but when you do run into the problems, they won't necessarily feel like urgent problems. They'll feel like problems that you've planned for. If you can take away anything from this episode, just keep in mind, it always takes longer than you expect. So thank you for listening to this episode of Your Path to Book Publishing. If you haven't already, give us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Hit that follow button so you can get the latest episodes every week. And go out there, keep writing, keep publishing, keep building your brand, and connect and impact the individuals that you want to. Thank you for listening.